Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Hamim. Surah Al-Dukhan, he went on reciting. And by the way, when we listen to these reciters of our times, Manshawi, Abdul Basit, Afasi, Hudayfi, all of these guys, and our hearts just move up to the heavens. Can you imagine if Allah had blessed us to hear our Prophet recite the Quran? Can you imagine if we were able to listen to him recite the Quran, what would happen to us, right? We are moved by Manshawi and Abdul Basit. How about if the teachers of all of these, how about if the one upon whom the Quran was revealed, how about if we could hear his voice recite? What do you think, how much voice Allah blessed him with? How do you think our hearts would move? So he began reciting the Quran in tilawah. Now, Al-Walid had never heard the Quran. This is the first time it's being publicized, right? Al-Walid had never heard the Quran. And so, Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira, and this is happening in public. In other words, the Prophet is sitting in front of the Kaaba. Everybody can see them. Nobody can hear the conversation, but it's public. Everybody can see them. So Al-Walid is listening, entranced. And in Surah Al-Dukhan, a verse comes on the second page that if you turn away from this message, then I warn you of a punishment, the likes of which Ad and Thamud were punished by. If you're going to turn away, still, then be warned that you will face the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And during this recitation of a page, only one page in our modern Mus'haf, it's around a page and that's it. Al-Walid, you can tell he's getting more and more tense, becoming mesmerized, he's palpitating, he's sweating, he's getting scared. When this verse comes, he jumps up and he puts his hand on the mouth of the Prophet. He says, I beg you, by the rights of our blood, we're both Quraysh, I beg you to not send this punishment. Now, the Prophet is just reciting the Quran, right? But you could see Al-Walid is now completely traumatized. And he turns and he runs away back to the people of the Quraysh who are watching at a distance. And they say to themselves, this Al-Walid is not the same Walid who left us. This Al-Walid is not the same. Something's happened to him. And then he came to him and he came to them and he said, "O my people, leave this man alone. Leave this man alone. For by Allah, you know my status in poetry, and no human being can compete with me in poetry." And he even said, and no jinn can compete. I don't know how he knows, don't ask me. Because no jinn can compete with me in poetry. And yet, wallahi, I have never heard any speech like this. I've never heard it. It's never been something that I could imagine. And it has a halawa to it. It has a sweetness to it I cannot describe. And it is something that is balawa, which means it's profound meaning. It's very deep in meaning. And then he said, and this speech will conquer all other speeches. In other words, you think I'm the chief? You think I'm the big guy? This speech will conquer all other speeches. Leave this man alone. So, and then he went away traumatized. The news spread amongst the Quraysh that Al-Walid bin Mughira has been traumatized by the Quran. The Quran has overpowered him. So Abu Jahl came to him. Abu Jahl said, "Oh my uncle," because he's the senior, 67 years old. "Oh my uncle, you must say something against the Quran. Because the rumor has spread that the Quran has captivated you. You must say something against the Quran." And so he said, "Let me think what I can say. I don't know what to. I don't know what else to tell you. Let me think. Let me stay a while. Let me stay alone for a while." So he stayed alone for a while, and before he could say what he wanted to say, Allah revealed the whole plot, and Allah already said what he would say. ذَرْنِي وَمَنْ خَلَقْتُ وَحِيدًا. Leave me alone with him whom I created. وَأَدْرَكْتُهُ لَوْ مَالًا مَمْدُودًا وَبَنِينَ شُهُودًا وَمَهَّدتُّ لَهُ تَمْهِيدًا ثُمَّ أَتْبَعَ عَزِيزًا كَلَّا إِنَّهُ كَانَ بِآيَاتِنَا عَنِيدًا إِنَّهُ فَكَّرَ وَقَدَّرَ فَقُتِلَ كَيْفَ قَدَّرَ ثُمَّ قُتِلَ كَيْفَ قَدَّرَ. Allah is saying, he thought and he plotted and he planned. May he be cursed how he plotted and planned. May he be cursed again how he plotted and planned. And ثُمَّ نَظَرَ وَبَصَرَ ثُمَّ عَبَسَ. He kept on going back and forth. He kept on scowling. In other words, in the privacy of his home, he's walking back and forth. He's thinking, what can I say? And Allah reveals in the Quran what he's doing in the privacy of his home. Allah describes in exquisite detail. He's walking around in his house, his face is all angry, walking back and forth, thinking, فَكَّرَ وَقَدَّرَ. And then the only thing he can say, إِنْ هَذَا إِلَّا مَا هَدْ إِلَى قَوْلِ الْبَشَرِ, that this is only something that a man has said, إِنْ هَذَا إِلَّا سِحْرٌ يُؤْثَرُ. This is magic that has an effect. In other words, all that he could say, the Prophet ﷺ is a magician. That's all he could say. And Allah revealed what he would say before he said it. And this is yet a further indication of the miraculous nature of the Quran. And this is something, as I said, we can go on and on. So many other stories that when the Prophet ﷺ first recited the Quran, how it had an impact on the Arabs. And to this day, it is universally acknowledged, even amongst non-Muslim Arabs, Christian Arabs, it is acknowledged that the Quran is the pinnacle of Arabic beauty. It is acknowledged that there is nothing that is, just like in English we have our Shakespeare, we have our Chaucer, in amongst the Arabs, whether you're Muslim or not, everybody knows the Quran is the standard. The Quran is the standard of eloquence. And that is something universally acknowledged. Of the miracles of the Quran, Yusuf, can you take this? Of the miracles of the Quran is the fact that, she's going to cry now. Okay, leave her. She's very attached, mashallah. Of the miracles of the Quran is the fact that it predicts the future. It predicts the future. In other words, there are miracles in the Quran, mashallah. There are miracles in the Quran that mention things that are going to happen in the future. Things that are going to happen in the future. And of these things, the most famous one, as you know, is Alif Lam Mim Ghulibat al-Rum, where in a battle, the Romans and the Byzantines were fighting one another. The Romans and the Byzantines were fighting one another, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala predicted the outcome, not of this battle, but of the next battle. So in this battle, the Romans lost. غُلِبَتِ الرُّومُ. The Romans lost. And by the way, this is a very interesting prediction, because at that time, the Romans and the Byzantines were superpowers of the time. There were no other superpowers other than these two superpowers. There were no other superpowers other than these two superpowers. And the Romans and the Byzantines were fighting each other for 300 years. For 3 centuries they're fighting one another. And am I saying Byzantines? Excuse me. The Sassanids, the Persians. The Romans and the Persians are fighting one another. Better change this, yes, mashallah. The Romans and the Persians are fighting one another. Yeah, where's Ammar? Can you bring Ammar? Where's Ammar? Can you bring Ammar to come? No, she's going to cry if you take her. Wallah, she's a very... Yusuf, take her. Just take her, let her go. Let her go. Zainab, do something by yourself. So the Romans and the Persians were fighting one another. Now I said that both of them were superpowers, right? The both of them were superpowers. And it so happened that the Persians increased their quantity and quality. And many people predicted that the Romans were khalas, that's it, end. So Allah says, غُلِبَتِ الرُّومُ, the Romans have been defeated. Now, for those of you, most of you can remember this, back in the 80s, there were 2 superpowers, right? You all know them, right? Now, in the 80s, it was a Cold War going on. In the 60s and 70s as well, these 2 superpowers were racing one another. Nobody could have predicted which one would be more powerful. However, by the late 80s, early 90s, everybody knew who was going to be the winner, right? Imagine, go back in the time of the late 90s, right? When we knew for a fact that one of these superpowers would overpower the other one. Imagine if somebody said, no, Russia will be the major superpower, right? Russia is going to be the one that will outnumber and outmaneuver America. People would have said, you're crazy. Everybody can see that America is a superpower that's going to be up and coming. This is what Allah predicted in the Quran. Yes, right now the Romans have lost, and you think they're going to lose. Give it a few years. وَهُمْ مِنْ بَعْدِ غَلَبِهِمْ سَيَغْلِبُونَ فِي بِضْعِ سِنِينَ. After this loss, in a few years, they will win over the Persians in just a few years. And that's exactly what happened. And other miracles happened as well. As you know, Abu Bakr made a bet with the Quraysh, and this is a halal bet because you know who's going to win, right? It's not a bet that you don't know who's going to win. It's a halal bet. Allah Azza wa Jal said that the Romans will win. So Abu Bakr and the Quraysh were so Abu Jahl said, this is impossible. I will give you 100 camels if they win. It's like, as I said, imagine in the early 90s, somebody said, Russia will win over America. It's not possible. It's obvious who's going to win. So Abu Bakr said, sure, 100 camels both ways. So they made a bet about this, but don't choose this for modern gambling. You can't use it for that. That's a separate issue altogether. There are many other miracles of the Quran as well. I don't want to go on and on. Of them is the stories of the Quran. Allah mentions that the stories of the Quran are something that are miraculous, right? The fact that Allah tells these stories. Now I want you to understand, many of us don't realize one thing. Many of us don't realize one thing. And that is Arabia was a backward society. Arabia was a society that had no scholars. It didn't even have a library. I want you to imagine this. In the whole country of Arabia, there's no library. There's no books. The Arabs did not read and write. They had no direct contact with scholarship and academia. In our times, imagine the jungles of Africa. Imagine the Aborigines.